he found her sharpening a skinning knife by the weak light of a tallow lamp. The cottage was a single room smelling of dried herbs and wood smoke, and the damp chill of the surrounding forest. It was a clean smell, an honest one. He had not smelled anything honest in a decade. She did not look up when he filled the doorway, his shadow falling long and sharp across the packed earth floor. But the rhythm of the whetstone paused for a single critical beat. Then it resumed a steady, abrasive whisper, the grating sound of stone on steel. It was a sound that knew its purpose. So, he thought, did she? He had seen her from a distance first, a solitary figure splitting wood with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. Her hair was the color of winter wheat, pulled back in a severe braid that fell to her waist. She was not tall, but she moved with a rooted solidity, as if the forest floor had made a pact with her feet. He had watched her for an hour before approaching, letting the fury of the all-night ride cool in his veins. The fury had been replaced by something colder, heavier, a dread that had the texture of finality. It was one sentence in a letter he was never supposed to read, found clutched in the hand of a dying servant who had served his household for 20 years with downcast eyes and impeccable silence. Lyra. Her name had been Lyra. He had barely known it, and now it was the only name that mattered. They said, "You were the daughter," he said. His voice was rough from the road and disuse. It was not a king's voice. It was the voice of a man who had forgotten how to speak of anything other than command or decree. The whisper of the whetstone stopped. She set the knife down carefully, its newly honed edge catching the lamplight like a sliver of ice. Only then did she lift her head. Her eyes were not brown, like her mother's. They were the color of gray stone after a rain, flecked with something that might have been green or gold or neither. They were his eyes. The realization struck him not as a thought, but as a physical blow, a sudden hollowing in his chest. "They say many things in Stonefall," she replied. Her voice was low and even, without welcome or fear. It was simply a statement of fact. Most of them are lies meant to pass the winter. She stood, wiping her hands on a leather apron. She was not intimidated by his size, by the fine cut of his dirt-streaked traveling clothes, or by the aura of coiled stillness that made hardened soldiers flinch. She simply watched him, her gaze analytical, measuring. It was the way a hunter watches a wolf that has wandered too close to the flock, not with panic, but with a calm and absolute assessment of the threat. This was not a lie, he said, stepping inside. He had to duck his head to clear the low lintel. The air inside was warmer, but no less tense. He felt caged. Too large for the space. Everything here was small, functional, essential. There was no room for kings. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded, brittle parchment, her mother's last words. He did not offer it to her. He simply held it. She wrote of you. Her last wish was for you to have her savings. A few silver coins. Enough for a proper burial. She was practical, the woman said. Her expression did not change. He saw the grief, but it was a deep, old thing, a feature of her internal landscape, not a sudden storm. It was held in the rigid set of her shoulders, the slight tightening of her jaw, and she asked for nothing else. She asked that the letter be burned after it was read by the steward. But he did not burn it. It was not a question. He brought it to me, Kaelin confirmed. He thought the final line was significant. He paused. He had read the sentence 100 times on the ride here, the words branding themselves into his mind. Tell Alara she has her father's eyes and that the blood of the Northern Ridge runs true. The Northern Ridge, his blood. The blood of the Alpha. What is your name? he asked, though he already knew. The name was in the letter. He wanted to hear her say it. He wanted to attach the sound to the impossible reality standing before him. Elara. He saw it then. The thing Lyra had hidden in this remote, forgotten village. It wasn't just a child. It was the wolf. Not the creature of tooth and claw, but the essence of it. It was in the proud line of her throat, the unblinking stillness of her gaze, the way she stood her ground not in defiance, but as if it were the only natural thing to do. She was of the pack. She did not know it, but every line of her body sang with it. And he, the king, whose bloodline was a chain of command, a political weapon, a sacred trust, had a daughter. A daughter living in a mud-walled cottage at the edge of his kingdom, sharpening knives and smelling of wood smoke. The secret was a blade pressed to the artery of his reign. And Lyra, in her quiet, desperate grief, had just handed it to his enemies. He stayed. He could not leave, and he could not force her to come with him. To bring her to the capital now, a stranger with his eyes, would be to sign her death warrant and invite a challenge for his throne. The covenant was clear. No unacknowledged heir could be recognized. An undeclared child of the Alpha was a threat, a loose thread that the Council of Lords, particularly Vorlag, would pull until his entire reign unraveled. So he stayed a king in exile in a one-room hut and watched the daughter he never knew he had. Elara accepted his presence with the same unnerving calm she had shown upon his arrival. She gave him her cot, taking a bedroll for herself by the hearth, and asked for nothing. They lived in a silence that was both vast and suffocating. He watched her work. She moved with a silent competence that he, a man surrounded by the performative efficiency of courtiers and guards, found deeply unsettling. She checked her traplines at dawn, tended her small garden, mended her own clothes, and read from a small, worn book of herbal lore in the evenings. She did not ask who he was, why he was truly there, or what he wanted. She simply made space for him, a silent, brooding fixture in her solitary life. Her acceptance was more damning than any accusation. It was the acceptance of a burden one must carry. He was a fact, a problem, and she was dealing with him. One evening, she was cleaning a brace of rabbits, her movements swift and precise. He sat on a stool in the corner, a position that felt both ludicrous and necessary. He was a king. He had commanded armies. And he was watching a woman he had fathered in a brief, forgotten moment of solace gut a rabbit with a knife she had sharpened herself. You never knew her, Elara said, not looking up from her work. The words dropped into the quiet room like stones into a deep well. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation that was not about a practical necessity. Lyra, you never knew her. It was true. He had known a quiet servant girl with soft hands and a terrified loyalty in her eyes, a moment of warmth taken in the cold political landscape of his early reign, a comfort he had forgotten as swiftly as he had sought it. He had been young, embattled, surrounded by wolves in courtly dress. She had been a moment of peace, a moment with consequences he had never imagined. No, he said. The admission felt like a shard of glass in his throat. I did not. She nodded, as if he had confirmed a long-held suspicion. She knew you, though. She spoke of the North, of a king who carried the winter in his heart but was not cold. She said he was. Still, that the world moved around him, but he was the stone in the river. Elara finally looked at him, her gray eyes clear and sharp. She made you a story. It's easier to live with a story than with a man. She went back to her work, her meaning hanging in the air between them. Lyra had not loved a king. She had loved a myth she had created to survive his absence. And Alara, her daughter, had inherited the silence but not the myth. She saw only the man, the stone, and she was not impressed. He found himself watching her hands. They were capable, scarred in places, the nails short and clean. One afternoon, while she was outside, he picked up a small object from the mantelpiece. It was a piece of dark wood, carved into the shape of a wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl. The carving was rough, clearly amateur, but the lines of it, the curve of the back, the tension in the legs, it was a style he knew. It was the way his own father had taught him to carve, a tradition passed down through the Alpha line, a way of teaching the anatomy of their other nature. He was holding it when she came back inside, her arms full of firewood. She stopped when she saw him with the carving, her body going tense. The soft thud of logs dropping onto the floor. "My mother made that," she said, her voice tight. "She said it was to remember the North." He placed it back on the mantel, his movements slow, deliberate. She remembered it well. The days bled into one another. The silence in the cottage became a language. He learned the sound of her breathing as she slept. He learned that she hummed a low, tuneless sound when she was tending her herbs. She learned that he did not sleep through the night, but sat by the dying embers of the fire, a sentinel watching over a life he had no right to disturb. The proximity was a slow poison. It was dismantling the king, piece by piece, leaving only the man, a man who felt the weight of his daughter's quiet judgment in every shared silence, in every glance. She did not quite let him see. He was not being saved by her. He was being witnessed. And he found that it was infinitely worse. He was a man who had been looked at his entire life by subjects, by rivals, by allies, by lovers, but he had never been truly seen. They all saw the crown, the power, the alpha. Ilara saw the stranger who had invaded her home and shattered the quiet certainty of her world, and she watched him. He had thought his stillness was a weapon, a shield. In her presence, it felt like an empty room. One morning, a rider appeared at the edge of the woods, not a village messenger, a royal scout, wearing the silver and gray livery of the king's guard. He did not approach the cottage, but his presence was a clear signal. He had been found. The world was coming for them. Kaelin went out to meet him. Ilara watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of neutrality. The scout dismounted, bowed low, and delivered his message with his eyes fixed on the ground. Lord Vorlag and the council were growing restless. The king's prolonged absence was causing concern. Whispers were spreading. Whispers of a trip to the northern border, of a woman long dead, of a secret kept for 2 decades. Vorlag, ever precise, had sent not a threat, but an invitation for the king to return and quell the unfortunate rumors. Kaelin dismissed the scout and turned back to the cottage. Ilara was still there, a silhouette against the dim interior. "The story is over," she said as he approached. "The man has to go back to being a king." He stopped before her. The damp earth smelled of rain to come. "It is not that simple, isn't it?" she asked, a flicker of something sharp and bitter in her eyes. "You have a kingdom to rule. I have traps to check. We are what we are. Your arrival doesn't change that. It only complicates the mourning." He wanted to tell her everything about the covenant, the laws of succession that were as unyielding as iron, about Foreleg, a man who would use her existence to break him, to seize power, not for the good of the pack, but for the purity of his own fanatical vision. He wanted to explain that she was in mortal danger, that her quiet, self-sufficient life was a myth that had just been burned to the ground. But the words would not come. Explanations were a form of weakness. He had never explained himself. He acted. "They will not let this go," he said instead. "Who are they?" "The men who value bloodlines over blood." Her chin lifted slightly. "And you are their king." It was an accusation. He was the one who upheld these laws, who commanded these men. He was the source of her danger. He could see the walls she was building behind her eyes, the swift and silent retreat into the fortress of herself. She had been alone, and she had been safe. He had brought the world to her door, and it was a world that would devour her. That night, a storm broke. The sound of wind howling, then the first crack of thunder. It was a violent northern squall that threw sheets of rain against the cottage's single window and made the timbers groan. The fire in the hearth spat and hissed. In the enclosed space, the storm felt personal and attack. They sat in their accustomed silence, the tension between them now thick with the unspoken threat of the scout's message. Alara was mending a tear in a cloak, her stitches small and even. Kalen was watching the fire, but he was seeing Vorlag's thin, cruel smile. "He will use you," Kalen said suddenly, the words torn from him. Alara's needle paused. She did not look up. "The man from the council, Vorlag, he will see you as a weakness, a tool to question my authority, my fitness to rule. Because of my mother? Because of me?" He corrected, his voice low. "Because you are my daughter, and because your mother was not of a sanctioned line. To them, you are a contamination, a threat to the purity of the pack." She set her mending aside. "So this is about wolves and bitches and pedigrees. I am a half-breed stray, and your prize pack will not have me sullying the kennels." The raw bitterness in her voice was a weapon, and it found its mark. He flinched. "It is more complicated than that. It is always more complicated when men of power wish to excuse their own cruelty," she retorted, finally looking at him. The firelight carved shadows under her high cheekbones. "You speak of this covenant, this law. Did you make it? It is ancient. It predates my father's father. But you uphold it. You enforce it. You are the alpha, the stone in the river. Or are you just another piece of driftwood, carried along by the current?" The challenge was plain, brutal. It was the question he had been asking himself in the dark hours before dawn for years. Was he a king or merely a steward of traditions that had grown rotten? He had no answer for her. There was a sudden sharp crack of lightning and the lamp flickered, plunging the room into a momentary stark contrast of light and shadow. A loud, close clap of thunder. In that instant, he saw the faint, silvery trace of a scar running from her left temple into her hairline, a mark he had not noticed before. Before he could stop himself, he reached out his fingers, tracing the air an inch from her skin. "How?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of authority, her composure fractured for the first time. A flicker of old pain, of vulnerability crossed her face. Before she mastered it, she pulled back slightly. "A fall. When I was a child." He knew she was lying. He was alpha. He could smell the lie, a faint, acrid scent beneath the wood smoke and herbs. It was a wolf's wound, the kind a challenger leaves on a pup to market. Someone knew what she was. Someone had known for a long time. "Who?" he pressed, the king's command returning to his voice. Who knew what Lyra had hidden here? She stood up abruptly, turning her back to him, presenting him with the rigid line of her spine. "It was a long time ago. It is the only thing that matters," he said, rising as well. He was behind her now, his presence overwhelming in the small space. He could feel the heat of her body, the tension vibrating from her. Alara, tell me. She turned slowly, her face pale. The hunter's calm was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. There was a man, a council scout like the one you sent away. He came through years ago when I was a girl. He said he was tracking a rogue. My mother sent me to the woods to gather roots. When I came back, she stopped, her throat working. He was leaving. My mother was afraid. I had never seen her afraid. The man looked at me. He smiled. He said I had the alpha's mark on me already, and it was a pity it had been wasted on a girl. Then he touched my face. Her hand went to the scar. His nail was sharp. He said it was a reminder that secrets have a price, and that the North always collects its debts. The sound of rain lashing against the window. Kalen felt a cold, primal rage rise in him, so potent it made the air crackle. Forlag, it had to be Vorlag's man. He had known. For years, Forlag had held this knowledge, a knife in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. He had not just let Alara live. He had cultivated her as a weapon, a secret to be deployed when it would cause the most damage. He had left a scar on a child as a promise. He looked at Alara, at the fierce, wounded pride in her eyes, and he understood. Her self-sufficiency was not just a trait. It was a shield she had been forced to build, piece by piece, against a world that had marked her as a threat before she even understood what it meant. She had hidden her to protect her from his world, from his laws, from his enemies. The weight of his own ignorance, his own failure, was crushing. He had been a story to Lyra, but to Alara, he was the monster at the end of it, the king, whose cruelty was not excused but embodied by the laws he served. The silence that fell between them now was different. It was not empty. It was filled with the weight of a 20-year-old secret and the fresh, raw wound of its telling. He saw the carved wolf on the mantle, its silent wooden howl, a memory of the North, a warning. He finally understood. It was a cage. The storm passed with the dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean and smelling of wet earth and pine. The air in the cottage was heavy, thick with the things that had been said and the far greater things that had not. Kaylin watched Alara as she moved about the room, her motions as precise and contained as always. But he could see the strain now. It was in the set of her shoulders, the way she avoided his gaze. She was rebuilding her walls, and he was the threat she was fortifying against. He knew he could not stay. His presence was a beacon, drawing the attention of men like Forlag. Every day he remained in Stonefall, he endangered her more. But the thought of leaving her here, alone with a secret that was no longer secret, was impossible. He would not abandon her to the wolves. Not again. That afternoon, as she was bundling dried herbs, her back to him, she spoke. "You should go," she said. It was not a request. It was a command, spoken with the quiet authority of someone who owned her own life. "Your man will have reported back. They will be expecting you. Your absence will look like guilt." "I am not leaving you here," he said. "You have no choice," she replied, turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable, her gray eyes holding his. "I am not your responsibility. I am a consequence you did not intend. You do not owe me protection. My mother kept me from your world for a reason. I will not be a pawn in it." Now, she was offering him an escape, a way to reclaim his throne, his power, his life, and leave the complication of her existence behind. She was giving him permission to be the king she thought he was, a man who valued power over blood. It was a test and a dismissal. Before he could answer, another rider appeared. This one was not a scout. He was dressed in the formal, severe black of the council's justicars, a raven insignia on his breast. He did not wait at the edge of the woods. He rode directly to the cottage and dismounted, his movements stiff with arrogance. He carried a scroll case. Forlag's answer had come. The justicar announced his presence with a sharp rap on the doorframe. He did not wait for an invitation to enter. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the small space with disdain before settling on Kaelin. He ignored Alara completely, as if she were part of the furniture. "My Lord King," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "Lord Vorlag sends his greetings and this summons. The council has been convened on a matter of grave importance to the security of the pack and the sanctity of the bloodline." He held out the scroll case. It was sealed with Forlag's sigil, a wolf's skull entwined with thorns. It was a declaration of war disguised as procedure. Kaelin did not take it. He looked from the Justicar's smug face to Alara. She was watching the exchange, her expression completely shuttered. He could feel her willing him to take it, to go, to leave her to her life, to choose the throne over her, to prove her right about him. "The matter," Kaelin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Can wait." The Justicar's eyebrows rose. "My lord, the covenant is clear. A summons from the convened council cannot be ignored. It pertains to a potential threat, a dilution of the alpha line." He finally glanced at Alara, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. "A stray cannot be permitted to trouble the pack." The insult was deliberate, a public challenge to Kaelin's authority. He was testing the king, seeing if he would defend this nameless woman or bow to the council's pressure. Alara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she remained silent, her face a stone mask. Kaelin took a slow step forward, placing himself between the Justicar and Alara. The air in the cottage grew cold. "You are on my land," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a low growl that was not entirely human. "Speaking to my guest. You will choose your next words with the care of a man who wishes to keep his tongue." The Justicar paled, taking an involuntary step back. He had expected the politician king, not the alpha. He bowed his head stiffly. "My apologies, my lord. I merely deliver the message." "Deliver this one in return," Kaelin said. "Tell Lord Vorlag that I am occupied with a matter of northern succession, a matter of my own blood, and that he will address my daughter with the respect she is due, or I will address his treason with the justice it deserves." Silence. The word hung in the air. Daughter, he had said it, not in a private confession, but as a public declaration, a claim, a line drawn in the earth. The Justicar's eyes widened in shock and something like triumph. This was the confession Forlag had been hoping for. He bowed again, a sharp, jerky motion, and backed out of the cottage. His mission accomplished, the sound of his horse galloping away faded into the forest. Kaelin did not move. He stood, his back still to Alara, the weight of his own words settling over him. He had just thrown a torch into a powder keg. He had chosen. There was no going back. He turned to face her. Alara was staring at him, her mask finally broken. Shock, fear, and something else, something he could not name, warred in her eyes. The hunter's calm was gone. The self-sufficient woman who asked for nothing was gone. In her place was someone who looked utterly, terrifyingly lost. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I have told the truth," he said simply. You have declared war, she shot back, her voice shaking with a fury born of fear. You have made me the battlefield. This is not protection. This is a death sentence. It is the only protection I can offer, he said, his gaze locked on hers. Vorlag and the Council would have used your secrecy to destroy us both. They would have hunted you down and called you an imposter, a pretender. They would have killed you in the shadows and used your ghost to haunt my throne. A secret is a weapon in my world, Alara. By speaking your name, I have not given them a weapon. I have taken it from them. He stepped closer to her, his shadow falling over her. They will not come for you in the dark now. They will have to come for you in the light, and I will be standing with you. Her breath hitched. She looked around the small cottage, at the familiar walls, the hearth, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the small, quiet world she had built for herself. A world that no longer existed. I don't know how to be a king's daughter, she said, the word small, fragile. I only know how to be myself? Good, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not define. They have had enough of king's daughters. It is time they remembered what a wolf looks like. He saw the struggle in her eyes, the instinct to run, to retreat into the wild, solitary places she knew, but he also saw the flicker of something else, the blood of the northern ridge, the unyielding core that had allowed her to survive alone for so long. She did not run. She held his gaze, the soft sound of a single deliberate exhalation. She straightened her shoulders, the motion subtle but profound. The fear was still there, but something else was rising to meet it. Resolve. She was a stone in the river. After all, he had just given the river a reason to change its course. She gave a single sharp nod. It was not agreement. It was not surrender. It was acceptance of the inevitable. The battle had been brought to her door, and Alara would not be the one to back away from a fight. That evening, she packed a small bag. She moved with her usual efficiency, but there was a new weight to her actions. She was not fleeing. She was preparing. She took the carved wolf from the mantelpiece and wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth, placing it in the bag. A memory of the North she was now forced to confront. He watched her, a silent observer of her quiet transformation. As the last of the light faded from the sky, she turned to him. "Where do we go?" she asked. It was the first time she had used the word we. It settled between them, a fragile and monumental thing. "Home," he said. The journey back was a silent one. They rode together, two riders against a world that was about to fracture. The air was cold and the forests of the north were deep and dark. But for the first time in his life, Kalen did not feel entirely alone inside his own silence. He was riding beside a woman with his eyes, a woman who had been a secret kept from him, and he had made her a truth that would shake his kingdom. He did not know if it was a wise choice or a foolish one. He did not know if they would survive the war he had just declared. He only knew that for the first time, he was not just upholding the law, he was defining it. When they finally saw the distant, cold lights of the capital, the fortress of his power, Elara reined in her horse. She looked at the sprawling city of stone and intrigue. Then she looked at him. Her face was calm in the moonlight, the face of a hunter assessing new and dangerous territory. He had not saved her. He had not rescued her. He had simply opened the cage. And now a wolf was coming home. The silence between them was no longer a void. It was a shared breath before the plunge, an earned stillness on the edge of the storm. It felt, strangely, like a beginning.